A soft, light, and airy puffy bun, folded and steamed, baked to perfection. Vietnamese Bánh Bao steamed buns, while traditionally split and filled with your choice of shredded meat and sautéed veggies, also make an incredible yeast roll eaten all on its own. This dough can also wrap around your favorite fillings and steamed for a wonderful dumpling meal. Bánh Bao buns resemble a simple yeast dough recipe with a few ingredients making them indulgent and extra light and fluffy. The steaming process keeps them light in both color and texture. While the yeasty flavor is reminiscent of a standard American yeast roll, the remaining flavors and texture make it entirely unique. Let's check out my version of a Vietnamese Bánh Bao steamed bun that's often served with a pork filling. For the ingredients, you'll need all-purpose flour, yeast, baking powder, salt, granulated sugar, whole milk, and a neutral oil like avocado, canola, or vegetable. In a stand mixer bowl or large bowl, if kneading by hand, we're going to add 270 grams, which is 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 7 grams, 1 package of active dry yeast, 4 grams, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 3 grams, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 25 grams, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Whisk all of this until combined. To a measuring cup, you want to weigh out 156 milliliters, which is about 2/3 of a cup of milk. You want to heat in the microwave for about 30 seconds until it reaches 100 to 110 degrees. To your heated milk, we're going to add 15 milliliters, which is 1 tablespoon of a neutral oil, and then just stir the two together. With the dough hook attached to your machine, if you're using a stand mixer, if you're doing this by hand, just stir your ingredients with a spoon until you get to the point where you can start kneading it. We're going to pour in, with the dough hook on low, the milk and the oil. Just pour it in slowly and allow the flour to start soaking it in. As the dough kneads, it should start pulling away from the bowl. Use a spatula to scrape down the edges from time to time as necessary to ensure that flour gets mixed into the liquid. Allow the machine to run on low to medium speed for 10 minutes or just knead by hand for the same duration. The dough should be tacky but not sticky to the touch. If you see flour still at the bottom of the bowl as your dough is kneading, add about a tablespoon of water or milk. It doesn't matter at this point because you have enough milk in it to do what it needs to do to make the dough tender. So you can add just a tablespoon of water, that's good enough. And then conversely, if your dough is wet, you can add flour, but I never have that problem with this dough. My dough is now sticking to the dough hook. It is no longer attached to the sides of the bowl, and it's not sticky, it's just that tackiness, and I didn't add any more liquid to it, so this is just perfect, just what we're looking for in this particular dough. And continue kneading for the duration to equal the 10 minutes. My dough has been happily making its way around the bowl for the last 10 minutes. It's even separated a little bit. It's not stiff, this is a little soft. It's tacky, it's not sticky. We have kneaded this enough. Whether you've been kneading by hand or using a stand mixer, just make sure your dough is shaped into a ball, put it back in the bowl, and then using some kind of an oil, cooking spray, whatever oil you have, neutral oil that we use to put in the recipe, just spray it on the top and sides of the dough and then roll the dough around in it because we want to keep this dough moist while it rises. We want to make sure it releases from the pan easily as well. So just roll it in there until you have a nice greasy looking ball. Then cover up your bowl with some plastic wrap or a towel. If you want to set your dough in a warm area, I'm just going to put mine over the stove where that tends to be the warmest. And we're going to allow the dough to double in size. It could take 30 minutes, it could take an hour, it could take a little bit longer. Just depends on your environment. When it has doubled in size, we can start dividing and rolling it out. Line a baking sheet with parchment paper and then just dust the parchment paper with a little bit of flour. This is where we're going to place our folded bao buns, and we want to make sure that they just don't stick to the parchment paper. And then set that aside. Take a look at our dough. It's doubled in size. So you're going to remove it and you're going to place the dough on an unfloured work surface. So we want to divide the dough into 16 relatively equal portions. You can eyeball your cuts or you can weigh them. So I tend to do a rough cut to start with, and then I go back and weigh them and then adjust them based on their weight. There's gonna be about 466 total weight of this dough. If you divide that by 16, it's about 29 grams. So your dough may be a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter, depending on how much liquid that you added to it, based on the needs that you had for your environment. Once you get them divided into the 16 dough pieces, we're gonna shape them into a ball. And this is why I keep an unfloured work surface, because this unfloured work surface creates friction and it helps to roll these balls very quickly into smooth rounds. And then place them each on a plate that we're gonna cover with a towel. And the reason I like to roll these into balls to start out with is because we have to roll them using a rolling pin into a 4-inch round circle, and we want that circle to be a circle. So if we start with a circle, we should end with a circle. Since I weighed these, I have little extra dough pieces sitting on top to make sure that I had the right amount of weight. So I usually like to fold them up and seal them so that it's sort of in that round, and then I tighten it up and seal it even more by rolling it against the work surface. Once all 16 dough pieces are shaped into nice round balls, go ahead and cover them up to keep them from drying out. Now we can flour our work surface. We needed that friction before, we don't need it now. Notice when you flour a work surface using a sifter, you can really disperse that flour so it's not concentrated in one area. Go ahead and remove one ball, place it on the center of your flour surface. You want to lightly flour your rolling pin. Notice this is very similar to making tortillas. You start out with a round ball, and we're just gonna roll this into a 4-inch in diameter circle. To a small bowl, you'll wanna add about 2 tablespoons of a neutral oil. I'm using avocado oil here. Then you want to dab the inside of your bao bun here. Then just fold it in half so that we're creating a bun, honestly, it's like a taco, right? Like if we're making tortillas. You can brush off some of that flour. Place it on the cookie sheet that we have lined with parchment paper and with flour, and then cover it so that it doesn't dry out. We're going to repeat the same step with the rest of our dough balls, rolling them out to a 4-inch circle. Brush the top with a little bit of neutral oil. This just helps for the dough to separate, to split them once they're baked. That's why we add the oil. And then fold it over so that it's in half, and then place it on parchment-lined baking tray next to the other. So if you wanted to make dumplings with this dough, you roll it out to the same diameter. Then you're gonna take a tablespoon of whatever you want, shredded or cooked meat, sautéed veggies, or even a small peeled hard-boiled egg like a quail egg. So what, if you can find it, that is. Those are traditional in Vietnamese dumplings and Chinese dumplings too. The cooked filling prevents soggy dumplings and ensures a cooked interior. So once you've put your tablespoon in there, then you're just going to bring up the edges of the dough like a purse, like so. And then you're just going to seal it so that you want to make sure that the top is where the opening is. Because when you bake this in your pot, you want to make sure the filling doesn't leak out. So then you've got these little purses that you're going to steam. So that's how you would make a dumpling. Once all of your bao buns are rolled out and folded, then we're going to allow them to sit covered for 30 minutes just to allow them to rest and puff up a little. After 30 minutes, when your buns have puffed up a little bit, go ahead and add about 2 inches of water in a stock pot or a steamer pot. I don't have a steamer basket, so I'm using a large stock pot, and I'm using a saucepan. I'm gonna put strainers in both, a pasta strainer and another strainer. So just make sure you have enough water, but it doesn't touch the bottom of the pot. I'm cooking 2 batches at once. I'm using a sifter, a colander, and then a pasta strainer. And in both of these, you're gonna place parchment paper. The parchment paper allows the buns to steam without any of the dough or flour falling into the pot that has the water in it. What I typically like to do is, once I have my parchment paper in the pot, I go along the corners and I just trim them all the way down to where they meet the pot. Once you trim the corners down, you can see the paper sits flush in the colander, which will prevent any folds from occurring in our dough as it bakes. Turn on your burner so that on high, because we want the water to boil. While the water is getting ready to boil, you're going to place your buns in the steamer basket or your pot, whatever you're using. And you want to place them so there's a little bit of space between them, because they will expand as they cook, since they do have the baking powder and they do have the yeast in them. I can cook 5 in each colander, and that's going to work for me. And I'm going to do the same to the other strainer, so both of mine are ready to steam. Once your water begins to boil in both pots, go ahead and place the strainers in them, ensuring that the bottom of the strainer does not touch the water. Go ahead and turn the heat down to where you have a simmer. So we want it to bubble, but just not bubbling too much. Okay, the bottoms of my pots are not touching the water. Put lids or foil on top of your steamer basket or pasta pot. You're going to set your timer for 20 minutes. That's all it's going to take to cook your buns. Once your 20 minutes is up, go ahead and remove the lid, the heat on, because we're going to add another batch of buns to this. And then just remove them from the pot and place them on a cooling rack. If you notice they're a little bit damp on the back side because they've been sitting next to the paper, then you can flip them over and they will dry out. Notice how puffy they are. They are cooked. They look great, ready to split. And then add your next batch to the pot, like so. So I'm going to get 2 batches in total from both pots. And then once you fill your second batch in, cover it, set your timer for 20 minutes while your others cool. Notice how pale in color they are from the steaming method. They smell yeasty like a yeast roll. They puffed up during baking. Notice how puffy they are all around, thanks to the yeast and the baking powder. The fold makes a great natural split for the fillings like meat, veggies, and sliced or grated egg. And of course, because we put the oil down and folded them, they did not stick together. It made it easy to split. So let's tear in it. Notice that stretch. Like a yeast bread due to the gluten development from the rises and gas. This bread is soft, very tender from the whole milk, which I think makes a softer crumb than water. These buns are fantastic hot off the steamer. As they cool, they shrink a smidge and become less fluffy, but they are still really fluffy and still very good. Serve the buns with preferred fillings or just a slice of good cheese or butter. These buns are versatile and can be enjoyed with anything you desire. Bao buns are best eaten immediately, but they can be stored in a sealed container at room temperature, if not filled, for up to a week. For storing bao dumplings that are filled, place in a sealed container in the fridge for up to 3 days. Whether you're celebrating Lunar New Year or just in the mood for a wonderful tasting yeast roll, give these guys a try. I think you would be pleased. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. Until next time, go bake the world.